and welcome to our next episode of Global.Science, a podcast on science education across the world. I'm Fabia Battistuzzi.
I'm Lev Horodisky, and this is our season finale. It's our very last episode, potentially.
Maybe, until we start again.
Exactly.
Okay, so Lev, what are we going to talk about?
We're going to talk about promotions and how you move up through your academic career after you secure an academic job.
That is quite interesting. So did you move up in your career?
Yes, and I did that mostly by quitting my job and getting a new one because those are the only options available to me. How did it work for you?
So in my case, it was a little bit simpler, although changing jobs sometimes...
Simpler.
Well, let's just say I didn't have to change a job, although sometimes that does sound appealing. No, I kind of followed a usual path. So from assistant professor, I was on tenure track, as we say in the US, which means it's usually a 5 to 6 year period in which you are, doing the things that a professor is supposed to be doing. So teaching, doing service and doing research. And then after that period, the department and the rest of the university decide if you are worthy of staying with them or not. And that's how you end up getting tenure and becoming an associate professor. And then the next step is become a full professor. That hasn't happened to me yet, so I don't know what to tell you.
So what happens during the tenuring process when you're moving in that transition from assistant to associate?
Well, it depends a lot on the institution. It depends on the department and on the field. But in general, for the scientific fields that I'm aware of, generally what it means is that you have to show that you obviously can teach, that you can mentor students, so you have established your own research lab, and that you can attract the funding. And that is the most difficult part, because obviously you need to get funding from outside of the university, and that support your research. And so that is usually kind of the make it or break it point of the tenure track. If you can get this funding, usually you are okay. If you cannot, it can become a little more complex.
So essentially your job security is dependent on a lottery.
Yeah, pretty much. So much so that actually with my friends, we used to say, how about we propose a change? And instead of depending on funding, and applying for grants, we simply go to Vegas and whoever wins gets tenure. That seems at least more fun.
Yes, I remember those conversations. And yes, I do find funding to be a bit of a gamble. So
yeah, it is difficult. But in your case, you switched the jobs in a very dramatic way, right? Because you went outside of academia and became independent.
Yes, I went independent, founded a nonprofit, and then I kind of dabble in academia every once in a while here and there, still teaching, just to stay in touch to understand what the academic needs are. And now I am in Brazil. So we started this season, well, 15 weeks ago from the listener's perspective, but 6 months ago from a recording perspective. We've been really powering along on these recordings. And now I'm in Brazil to investigate what the situation is like in Brazil. And that will introduce us to our guest today, and that is Dr. Roberto Greco. He is an associate professor in the Department of Science and Political Technology at the Institute of Geoscience at the University of Campinas. So welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Lev. Thank you, Fabian. Happy to be here.
Welcome, Roberto. So how long have you been in Brazil?
Oh, it's already 10 years. Yeah.
Oh, wow. As long as I have been in the US. Interesting.
So you're not originally from Brazil.
No, I am Italian. I born in Italy and I spent most of my life there. And then I moved here after a public selection here in the State University of Campinas. And I started to work here.
Okay. And so how was the transition from an Italian system to the Brazilian system? What kind of differences have you noticed? ask you which one you like better, because you're supposed to say the Brazilian one. So I won't ask you that.
No, but well, I'm still in really good relation, even with the department where I do the PhD. They invited me 2 years ago as visiting professor there, spend a semester, an online semester. It was in the pandemic. But well, I was not working in the academy at that time. My trajectory is quite different from the usual one. I mean, after the undergraduate study in natural science, I spent 10 years working in different fields as like state regional park guard, like ranger. And for 3 years, then I work for a trade union for farmers. Then I start to work in school. Then I do a PhD, and then I start to be engaged in international organization in earth science education. And through this contact, I get aware of this position there. I come here before as visiting professor, and after a while, I take a permanent position. And so I do not have really a lot of experience of the academic life in Italy. I just doing my PhD there, and
yeah, that's kind of similar to my experience. I did my undergraduate in Italy, so I don't really know how, the academic life from a faculty perspective works in Italy, except for what my friends tell me, of course, but not first-hand experience. So you started in Brazil. It's interesting that you said that through the connections that you made during your job that was connecting you to an international world, that's how you heard about the position in Campinas. I'm curious, how did you establish that network? Because establishing networks, it's already difficult enough within one city or one institution, but establishing networks that are international is even more complicated.
Well, during my PhD, I was doing a research in earth science education, and I know that when you do research, you would like to share the result of your research with a scientific community. And I don't find a scientific community on earth science education in Italy. So I started to look outside, because there was some people that work on that topic, but they were almost retired. And after a while, I discovered some few people in different universities that are not aware of each other. And so I was lucky, because I started to look for contact outside, and I get in contact with one teacher, one professor in England, that was one of the world leader in earth science education, one of the first chair of the International Geoscience Education Organization. So spent some time with him during an interchange. He let me the possibility to open many doors and to know many people.
So what was the transition like to Brazil? Because you came here without really knowing the language.
Well, I have some good Spanish at that time that in some way helped a little, but and I still have a strong accent from my city, Modena, and also from Spanish word that I use. So all the people, when I am talking here, usually our Brazilian colleague thinks that I am from another Latin American country. But well, it was not so easy. But in few months, I was able to understand quite a lot, and I started also to talk and to teach, and so it was not so complicated. But write well properly, it take time. It's a really difficult language, the Portuguese. Also the Brazilian Portuguese. Also, the people here, even the academic one, are used to use a reviewer for the language, because there are many rules that are different in the written language from the speaking language that people speak in the daily life.
Oh, wow. I did not expect Brazilian Portuguese to be that difficult. That's impressive. So you moved to Brazil and, you got adjusted. You said you started as a visiting professor.
Yeah.
And then what was your career path from there?
And then I start with the position as assistant professor, and recently I passed to associate professor. And the path is quite different from university to another university, because there are different kind of university. In Brazil, there are many private universities also that have a different system. Then there are the public one, and the public one usually are state or federal, because Brazil is a federation of state. So I am working at state university and in São Paulo state. And here the rule are that, at least in my university, that when you enter, after every 3 years, you can move an advancement in the career. And if you feel some requirement, minimum requirement, and you can also pass from assistant to associate if you feel some requirement, and also pass like an exam that is based on title, on a discussion, and on a presentation of a lecture.
That sounds very complicated and very stressful.
It was a little, yeah. I usually really calm and do not affected by stress, but this time it was a bit stressful, yeah. Yeah, even because after so many years that you work, and it's always a bit stressful when some other people assess you. And if you would like to become a full professor, you have to pass through another selection. And but this, it will take to me at least 5 years, because it's the minimum interstitium between the two levels. So for the next 5 years, I will be more relaxed. Yeah.
So, how long is it between associate and full professor for you?
It's a minimum of 3 years. But again, it kind of, here it's driven by grant funding. So basically the moment you get another big grant, and we're talking about at least $500,000 or higher, then you can apply for full professor without in the sciences. Again, without that, even if more year pass, it's probably not going to go through.
Okay. So Roberto, what do you do for day-to-day work? Do you depend as much on funding? So I know in the US, you need to raise quite a bit you get some funds from the university that pay your salary, but if you want to run your lab, you need to pull in funds from external agencies to pay students and pay for equipment. Does it operate the same way in Brazil?
Yeah, it's almost similar. I mean, we have some assistance directly by the university for lab and for at least at Unicamp, that is a good university with a lot of support. But however, usually professors go through funding there are several funding agencies, and in São Paulo state is pretty rich in comparison with other Brazilian state. So the situation for funding is not too bad, and but is decreasing quite a lot in the last few years in comparison from 10 years ago. The situation is really different now. I hope that in the next future they start to rise again. And yes, we apply for, we present project for funding, and that is usually PhD and master student also work on the lab, on the research group, and they also can also apply for fellowship independently, or more recently, better if they are related to some project that is already funded.
And so what kind of projects do you work on? Because we were out in the field a few months ago from the perspective of the listeners. And it was a project that was quite interesting on public outreach. You do a lot of public outreach related research, is that correct?
Yes, and this is interesting because let me to talk a little about a different concept from Western country. Here in Latin America, especially, they develop a concept that the university have not only to teach and to do research, but also in some way to give back to the population what are the results of the research, to bring some benefit to the wide population. And there are some special funding for this kind of activity. And this that we participated a few weeks ago was one of this project. That was a community-based project.
So how do you find working with those communities? You need to build an association with those communities first, and how long does that take? So the community we were working with, was that a long-standing collaboration, or was that something new for the project?
Well, this collaboration started around 5-6 years ago, and was quite unusual how it started, because it started by contact of a researcher in the Cardiff University. I was there for an exchange because we start to make a lot of joint projects between the two universities, Campinas and Unicamp and Cardiff University. And when I was there, some colleagues approached me asked me if I would like to collaborate with them in a project that are developing with this community in the Valley do Ribeira Valley. And look like an interesting project. And when I come back, I go to visit this community. I get in contact with other Brazilian researchers that are already engaged in the project. And since then, I start to work with this community.
So does this community welcome the connection with the researchers? I know that sometimes, especially here in the US, there can be a little bit of tension depending on the type of research. There can be tension. Sometimes communities feel sort of almost exploited by the researchers, and sometimes they're happy to connect. So how do you navigate that fine balance between to establish a healthy connection?
Well, I think that it was lucky because there was already an healthy connection. The researcher that already had contact with this community already established really good and equal relation with the community. One of the researchers that now is a professor in a federal university, he do his research project of PhD with this community. So he spent 3-4 years working with this community. So there was already stronger relation.
Okay.
And the project that we developed with the University of Cardiff, and also like an extension project, outreach project, recently with Unicamp, it starts from a demand of the community. And that I think it makes all the difference, because the leader of the community asked to the group of the researcher some support, some help to solve this some kind of issue, some kind of situation that they have in the community.
Yeah, I think I'm starting to see things moving in that direction here in the US as well. There are, first of all, funding opportunities for community engagement are increasing slowly, but they are increasing. And it's nice to see that the community leaders are the ones that actually reach out to the universities. So they start seeing, in a sense, a value in having people around them that can provide some sort of expertise, while the people in the university actually get to learn about what is around them, which is also a very good thing. So it seems like it's a win-win situation for for both of the communities and the universities. That is nice to hear that it's already well established in Brazil. That's a nice thing.
Yeah, this is my experience in that case, because also in Brazil there have been situations with conflict, not so easy. So for that reason also there is some ethical process that for research every research have to pass through in order to be approved and to have a healthy relation with the community and the individual or community that are subject of research. But these extension projects are more focused in developing some win-win situation with the community.
Yeah.
But what is the approval process like? Because in the US, we have the Institutional Review Board that if you're doing research with human subjects, you often need to, it varies from university to university, but you often need to describe the research you're going to be doing, what impact it can have on people. And there's a lot of paperwork that you need to submit to the university's IRB, and then they review it and determine whether the project can progress or whether it needs to be modified. And that could take anywhere from a few weeks to a few months, depending on the university and the scope of the project. So in your experience, how has that worked in Brazil?
Well, I think at the moment it worked quite well. In my experience, sometimes it take a while to have the approval, but I think is well organized. What is the project process here? Well, you can have some project funded or not that by some research foundation, and in any case, when you before to start your research, if your research involve people, and you have to pass through a ethical approval process, and this is split in two. It depends if it is by just like social study, like interview, questionnaire, observation, or is more biological or hospitalization. I mean, like blood sample or this kind of research that are genetic, that are more invasive research. So there are two separate committee that assess the project. I'm used to submit project by the social science, human social science committee. And if the project do not involve Native American or other minor community, or if do not have international resources, the approval usually is pretty speed. In maybe 2-3 weeks, you can have your if it is all right since the beginning. In 2-3 weeks, 1 month, you can have your approval in your hand. If your project involves international resources or study with the Native American and so on, you have to pass the first approval at university level, and then the project go to Brasilia, to the capital, to the main central committee that make a second assessment, and that usually take 1, 2, 3 months more to have the approbation. But it's something that everyone already know, and so that you can plan your research even with this part.
Right. So how do you get students involved in all this? Because I can imagine, obviously, you are, from a professor perspective, you are familiar with the process. You can communicate with the communities that you're going to work with. Do students get involved as well, or it's mostly a faculty-led kind of effort?
Well, it depends on the kind of project. There are some extension projects that are basically run by the student, undergraduate or graduate student, and the professor have mainly a role as coordinator. there are other, like the one that I am engaged now, that I have an active role in this project, but I also involve some of my graduate students that even because it's like a training for what they have to do for their PhD research in other area with other community. But they could be graduates, they could be undergraduates, they could be few, they could be many, it depends. Usually the resources are not too much. So in that project that is quite far away from Unicamp, usually I don't bring there more than 1-2 students. Other projects that are more local that have no other cost involved, it's more easy to engage more students.
Right.
Since next year, there is the obligation for all the course, undergraduate course, to have 10% of the hours of the course dedicated to extension project. So this is a huge revolution in the undergraduate course in all Brazil. So it's something new that it will start in some university already start this project, but the deadline for all the universities to start it is the beginning of next year.
Oh, wow, that's quite interesting. So all courses, regardless of field, will have to have some sort of community connection of some sort?
Yes.
Wow, that's interesting. I like that.
And there is a lot of theoretical discussion in how to do that. So, and every course have adopted different approach. And by the experience, we will see what work better, what do not work so well. So there will be for sure more adaptations in the next few years.
I'll be curious to see how it develops, because it could be something that the US could learn to do.
I think, yeah.
So I think for the last part of the discussion, I want to pivot to another project that you've been working on for a while, the International Earth Science Olympiad. I do remember when I was in middle school doing some kind of science Olympiad, and I remember it being a bunch of multiple choice questions that I don't think I did very well on. I can't even remember what topic it was. It may have been earth science, but that is a more international program. And I like the discussions we've had over the years about the intentions of the program being not just to find the best students who can do geoscience and earth science, but also to serve as a mechanism for getting quality earth science education materials into school systems around the world that may not otherwise have access to those kinds of materials. Could you tell us a bit more about the whole program and how it operates?
Okay, so the International Earth Science Olympiad is one of the many international science Olympiads that are now available worldwide, like physics, math, chemistry, and is one of the most recent. It's just started in 2007. And well, in this Olympiad, the purpose is, of course, to give the opportunity to the best students that are interested in the field to study more, learn more, and maybe continue later on undergraduate course or academic level. But is also a way to test a new way of teaching. And that is what we are trying to do with the IESO, that is to promote cooperative activity, learning with problem solving, with field activity. And the idea is to show to the mentor, the professor that brings the student at the International Olympiad, to show how to organize this kind of activity and to promote this kind of activity also in their country. In the last 2 years that there was a pandemic, so we do not have a presential Olympiad, was a good opportunity to stimulate the local mentor to prepare their own field activity, problem-solving field activity, and that it worked pretty well. We have a staff that mentor the leader of each national team, and we collect several good examples of this kind of activity. So in that way, I think it helped to spread the methodology. About the idea that this kind of Olympiad promote the academic interest of the student, at least in IESO, look like that is not so so effective. What we discover is that most of the students that participate at IESO decide to follow other paths like medicine or biology or other physics, chemistry. I mean, these are brilliant students that are selected through this Olympiad, and some of them have been successful in different international Olympiad. So they are good students in different fields, and some of them continue to study geology or science, some other no, and the majority no. But it's okay. I think the idea is that they have at least a contact with the earth science, with the earth system science approach, and in any field where they will work later on, they could bring this experience and try to apply this experience in their field of interest.
So do you think there's a place for some of these Olympiads to start converging? If you're going to have a lot of students that are doing earth science Olympiads but moving into biology, there are new fields that are new hybrid fields that are starting to develop. I've seen at American conferences of geohealth, interfacing geology and health. Do you think there's a place for these Olympiads to start to collaborate on in places where students can start seeing connections across these various fields that may seem to be very different?
Well, I think there is space, and I think the concept of Olympiad is it worked really well to get people involved. This is my experience when I organized IESO in 2011 in Italy. It was not so difficult. It was difficult, but it was not so difficult to put together the budget to organize the event. There are other kind of events that even to find a small budget is much more complicated. So is the name help to have engagement around. But so independent on the theme that you choose for your Olympiad, if you put the word Olympiad with some other things, you have a lot of chance to have quite a lot of participation from the public, from the student, and also for the sponsor. But after all these years of experience in Olympiad, I started to think if this educational model that work well for the purpose of engagement could be refined, or could be we could start to think something different, not based in competition, but more focused in cooperation. In IESO, we have also cooperation, but is inside in a context of competition. And I think it's not so necessary today to use this methodology, this strategy to engage people. There are a lot of collaborative and cooperative projects, especially that are now more easy with the internet connection. And so I think it's time to try to focus more in this kind of activity that I think personally is what the world need more nowadays, more cooperation and trust among the people, among the...
Yeah, so, and I think it makes a lot of sense, even because the the way we are doing science now, the way we do any kind of research, there are fewer and fewer projects that are led by a single researcher. The projects are collaborative in nature by now because you need expertise from so many fields. And so showing students early on how collaborative science can be, I think it would be a plus, and it would prepare them if they decide to, whether they stay in academia or they go into industry, if they do any sort of scientific research, that's what they're going to have to learn how to do really well, collaborate.
All right, excellent. Well, I think this was a very fascinating discussion, looking at a completely different system and perspective on how we can approach these educational endeavors. So thank you so much for your time, Roberto.
Thank you. Thank you, Lev. Thank you, Fabia.
Okay, so Lev, what did you learn from this fascinating conversation?
Well, I've already had all these conversations before, so this was a rehash for me. But I think what I liked most about the discussion was this thought of community projects and the idea of taking what we're doing in the academy and taking it out to the community around us. Especially in the US, there's a problem where state funding is getting cut for universities because the universities tend to have more of a cosmopolitan focus and focus on recruiting students from around the world and tend to neglect the community that surrounds them. So the idea that you can take students in all sorts of disciplines and connect them to their local community and showing them that that is important so that the community can see the value of the university. I think it's very good. And it's also it's an approach that we are working on helping develop around the world through GreenWorks, which we discussed last week.
Yeah, and I think universities are moving in that direction. So, for example, there are more and more universities that are establishing connections and articulations with community colleges to kind of bridge that gap. And that is the first step, right? You go towards the community college, and then from there you move towards the community leaders, the county, the state, whatever it may be. And yeah, I think that is a very powerful way for a university to actually give back to the community and really show even our own students, show them how the things they are studying in theory are actually applied. I think it's something that the students do enjoy quite a bit, at least from what I've seen. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how this new approach that Brazil is going to develop will shape up, because I think it could be actually an excellent idea and very, very powerful.
Excellent. And so what did you learn from this discussion that was new to you?
I think it's time to start an international astrobiology Olympiad.
I was thinking the same thing, because that could get into the interdisciplinary stuff. Plus, astrobiology is super sexy for students.
Yes, and I mean, astrobiology is born to be interdisciplinary. That's what it is. It's like, can you imagine how much fun the students would have, especially in a collaborative setting, like Roberto was saying? The biologists have to talk to the astronomers and to talk to the geochemistry people just to learn about the basics. That would be super cool to work on.
So what would be their challenge? What would be their challenge that we'd have to do? Do they just shoot themselves to Mars and the ones that get their first win?
Well, we could try that, although I'm not sure the parents would agree on that activity. I don't know.
Depends on the parent-child relationship.
Okay, that is a good point.
This is a horrible way to end the season.
Well, parents and students consider potentially applying to different kind of activities depending on how far away you want to be from each other.
So I think that's a good place to wrap up the season. I think we had we covered a wide range of topics. I think what's really stunned me about just in these 15 conversations we've had is just the diversity of career pathways into the sciences and the way that everyone kind of gets funneled into grad school along different pathways, but then splits out in all sorts of different endpoints, museums, earthquake monitoring, international universities, nonprofits, traditional pathways, community colleges. It's just really extraordinary to see how diverse this is. And it's just been an absolute pleasure to have conversations with everyone that we've talked to this season, not just because it's some of our friends we haven't talked to in years, but just in terms of having a discussion on what they've been doing since we last talked, which was in graduate school.
Yeah, and I think I'll be honest, after all these conversations, I kind of feel more positive towards the future. Sometimes it's difficult to keep, a positive outlook on the future. The world doesn't always seem a particularly happy place, but seeing how much energy and how many different ideas are out there and how many people are willing to push through to make these ideas a reality, it's encouraging. It's encouraging and it's inspiring. And it was really wonderful to see all of these great ideas take shape in many different ways.
All right. And on that note, we will close out the season. So we'll see you next season, unless we don't.
Hopefully see you soon.
Today's music is Brazilian Dance by Musa Production from Pixabay.com. To learn more about Roberto's university, the University of Campinas, go to www.unicamp.br. To learn more about the International Earth Science Olympiad, go to www.ieso-info.org. Global.Science is a production of Science Voices, a U.S. nonprofit organization. To keep up with all our projects, including future seasons of this podcast, follow us on Facebook or Instagram, or go to www.sciencevoices.org.